A proclamation from the book of Genesis. God put Abraham to the test. He called to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There you shall offer him up as a holocaust on a height that I will point out to you." When they came up to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Then he reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the Lord's messenger called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he answered. "Do not lay your hand on the boy," said the messenger. "Do not do the least thing to him. I know now how devoted you are to God, since you did not withhold from me your own beloved son." As Abraham looked about, he spied a ram caught by its horns in the thicket. So he went and took the ram and offered it up as a holocaust in place of his son. Again, the Lord's messenger called to Abraham from heaven and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you acted as you did in not withholding from me your beloved son, I will bless you abundantly and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants shall take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all the nations of the earth shall find blessing. All this because you obeyed my command." The word of the Lord.
Our first reading for this Sunday comes from the 22nd chapter of Genesis. This is the story of how Abraham was commanded by God to offer his son Isaac as a holocaust, as a sacrifice to God. So the sacrifice of the son Isaac to be performed by his own father Abraham. Sacrifice. What do we understand by the word sacrifice? I know in ordinary language or ordinary usage, we associate sacrifice with something that is painful on my part because I have to give it up, or something negative that I have to endure in order to accomplish something. So sacrifice is often associated with pain, with sorrow, with the heaviness of heart. Okay? So our tendency is, if we could avoid sacrifices, we would. We would rather choose a sacrifice-free life. That is because we think of sacrifice as something that is painful and a cross, a heavy cross to bear. But in the story of Abraham, we realize that sacrifice is really not about pain. Sacrifice is making something holy, making something sacred. That is the character of a sacrifice. Even if something is filled with pain and tears and expression of sorrow, if it does not sanctify, it is not a sacrifice. This is verified in our story. Of course, it must have been painful for Abraham to hear such a request or command even from God, that his son Isaac, who is supposed to be the beginnings of this great race promised to Abraham, would now have to be offered to God as a holocaust. So that means this child will not only die, but will be burned for God. But we know the story. Abraham obeyed. But before he could have completed the holocaust, the angel of the Lord stopped him. And the words of the angel of the Lord contain the meaning of sacrifice. Let us listen to those words. The angel of the Lord said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do the least thing to him. I know now how devoted you are to God." That's sacrifice. Doing something out of devotion to God. And Abraham's devotion to God is the expression of his faith. He believed in God. And because he believed in God, he surrendered his whole life to God. That surrender of life to God in faith becomes obedience to God, such that whatever God would command him, he would do as an act of submission to God, as an act of faith in God. That makes the action a sacrifice. It is sacred because it is done as an act of devotion and obedience to God. My dear brothers and sisters, according to St. Paul in the letter to the Romans, we should offer ourselves as a pleasing sacrifice to God, meaning our whole persons, our whole lives should be in harmony with God's will. We should do what God wants us to do. And everything we do, even the ordinary things of life, eating, drinking, studying, working, recreating, all of those should be done as an act of devotion to God. And we will not do anything that will hurt God. That's sacrifice. Imagine if that happens in all our thoughts, in all of our actions, then everything will be sacred. Everything will be holy. Everything is a sacrifice.